Have you ever correctly had a gut feeling to dislike someone who, on the surface, was a cool person that everybody else liked? What's that story? Story 1. My mom was a single mom and did the best she could. However, she thought it might be better to leave me with a neighbor than at home alone. From the age of 6, I pleaded with my mom to let me stay home alone until she got home from work, and that I would be okay. My intuition was right. The neighbor was convicted of multiple murders of single moms 1 and 2 towns over when DNA evidence came into being. He only liked to date and kill non-obese women. Fortunately, my mother was fat. Story 2. Apparently, when I was 4 or 5, my grandma introduced me to a new boyfriend. Everybody liked him, but I would have nothing to do with him. I guess he just came into her apartment one day and walked at her with something behind his back, saying nothing. She got an eerie feeling and said, "Are you going to kill me?" With a dead-faced stare, he came at her. She managed to jump over some furniture and get away. She's always been in great shape, running 3 miles a day until age 80. She got somewhere safe, called the police, and never saw him again. Story 3. Used to work with a psychopath. Dude who only ate cookie cake, only watched Disney movies, only listened to music from the 30s and 40s, drove an antique muscle car, enjoyed killing small animals, and always carried a 6-inch buck knife, which I wouldn't consider weird except we worked in hospitality. If there was ever a stereotype for serial killers, this guy freaking nailed it. Everybody else had passed him off as a sweet, sheltered young guy who didn't realize he was kind of strange. I did too until we started talking one night and he admitted to me he had some serious anger issues, blackouts and the like. Get into our group of friends at work and starts kind of obsessing over one of our female coworkers. Everybody passes it off as a crush. I knew better, and it wasn't pretty, but he played the let's be friends card. So me and my buddy were super tight with this chick. She started telling us he was saying things behind our backs trying to make it look like we were talking about her, obviously trying to separate us. I'm not fooled. Couple of months go by, things calm a bit. We're still being nice to the guy. Invite him to go hiking with my buddy, my little brother, and I. The dude shows up on the trail with a freaking combat machete, his buck knife, a slingshot if I remember correctly, and looking like we're about to play the most dangerous game ever. Both my bros pass it off as enthusiasm for the hike. I'm wary. I pick up a strong walking stick and begin carving it into a spear as we walk. Psycho notices and looks upset, like I've inconvenienced him, and then asks if we all want to come to a secret spot. It's only 12 miles into the trail and off the path by a little bit. My little brother was fat, and we only had 1 bottle of water between us all in a southern summer. I tell him we can't. Then he starts insisting my buddy go with him, and he was almost about to until I dropped our code phrase and gestured to bail. Always have one of those or a few of these with your friends. He says he's coming with me, and that's when I saw the psycho look in his eyes. Rage. He drew his machete and stepped towards my friend as he turned his back. So I stepped towards him with my spear. He saw me and shot off this smile and a laugh and said he'd go alone, then stepped off the trail into the woods and disappeared. I know he was watching us as we left because I told my buddy to take my little brother and stay at least 10 yards in front of me, and the entire time I could hear twigs snapping behind us. To wrap it up, we all survived, but it wasn't long after that when Psycho started stalking our coworker, showing up at random times and discarding dead animals on her property. She complained along with a dozen people not long after that, and he was fired, but not before he attacked her at work and had his ass beat. Don't know what happened to him after that. Don't really want to. Story 4. The new guy at the office. He was very charming and everyone liked him from day one, but there was something off. 3 months later, he throws me under the bus on a big project, and it backfires on him because I was ready. He ended up quitting a couple of months after because people knew what he'd done and they stopped working with him. Don't be an ass. There was a meeting coming up and he invites me along as a fly on the wall. Since I didn't trust him, I prepared content for the meeting just in case. When the meeting started, he was not on the conference call and the stakeholder says, "Hey, your coworker said you had numbers to present." Well, thank God I had numbers and a slide ready. The meeting ended and he never showed up, and the stakeholder was pissed at him. He wrote a long, nasty email to our manager. My manager asked me what happened, and I told him playing dumb that he had invited me to the meeting with no direction. But good thing I had slides ready, because otherwise our team and my boss would have looked bad. He agreed and ended up chewing him out pretty badly, and I got a big recognition for always being ready. I warned my close coworkers about what he'd done to me, and little by little, everyone noticed how crappy he was and started giving him the cold shoulder. He eventually quit, and no one in the office cared by that point. Story 5. Strongly urged by my parents to hang out with a girl on my bus. She ends up having an affair with her foster father and stabbed her foster mother to death because the dad convinced her to. Their 14-year-old biological daughter witnessed the whole thing. Some girl started talking to me on the bus ride home. I thought there was something off about her, but my parents, who are inherently optimists, told me to be nice and hang out with her. They even invited her over for dinner a few times. She lived about a 4-minute walk away from me, so it was hard to come up with excuses not to hang out. We eventually hung out a few times, and I found out that she was a foster kid and had gotten bounced around a lot. She was also on a lot of medication for bad joints, bipolar disease, and a few other things. She was almost 18. Well, anyway, it turns out she was having an affair with the father, and they plotted together to kill the mom so they could be together. They made sure to plan it during a time when the dad was out of town. The girl ends up stabbing her foster mother to death, and the family's biological daughter is the one to call 911. They put the 911 tape up online, and it was the worst thing I've ever had to listen to. Story 6. When I was in senior high school, my multimedia teacher was loved by everybody. But I hated that guy. He was a complete freak to me. He was super chill with the guys and an incorrigible flirt with the girls. We're 98% under 18. But everybody laughed when I'd say something about how weird he was around the chicks, and was even told it was because I was overweight, unattractive, and too sarcastic or mouthy. And that's why he picked on me. Oh well. Life went on. A few years after high school, I heard he was fired for having sex with an underage student. His poor wife at the time worked in the attendance office too, and had to take time away from work so the gossip would simmer down. I knew that guy was a creep. Story 7. One of my brothers was dating this girl, and everyone else had met her several times before I did, since I was off at college. So the first impression I get of her is when she shows up at our house and just walks right in. Doesn't knock, doesn't let anyone know she's there. Just walks her happy ass inside and sits on the couch. So then when I came down the hallway into the living room, the witch had this super vapid smile on her face. I just had this weird gut instinct that she was hiding something from everyone and was going to fight to the death to keep it hidden. I expressed to my mom that she gave me a weird vibe, and I got told to stop being jealous. But a long story shorter, she ended up having an entirely other relationship and life with another guy 3 hours away. Story 8. My sister's boyfriend. I just immediately found him to be very fake and disingenuous, but the rest of my family loved him and found him very charming. He owned a running store franchise that was more successful than the original store and was also doing well trading on the stock market. He sold the store back to the owners for a ton of money to focus on the stock market. But this was around the time of the stock market crash. So to help with that, he worked at the store as a salesman. They eventually got married and bought a house. And that's when the cops come knocking at the door to their large home with a view. He wasn't rich. He never owned the store. He was only ever a worker and had been stealing cash from the register products and selling them on eBay. The divorce came quickly enough after that. Story 9. Labrador could smell the evil on a wife beater. Kind of related, not a person but a dog. Years ago, I had a girlfriend who lived at home with her sister, parents, 3 dogs, and a cat. One of the dogs was a big goofy lab that loved everyone. I mean everyone. 2-year-olds could climb all over him, and he loved it. Anyway, the sister had been seeing some guy for a little while, and she was bringing him home to meet the family for the first time. The guy hadn't even come to the door yet. The dog was in the house and went ballistic. I'd never seen anything like it. He went from goofball to apex predator. Needless to say, he couldn't come into the house. They had to leave. About 2 weeks later, the sister comes home, he slapped her, and she ended it. She also found out that he beats his ex-wife before her. Story 10. My stepdad, on the surface, seemed like a good guy. Went to church on Sundays and once on Wednesdays. Always helped out when someone needed help, whether it was something as simple as loaning $5 to something as complicated as roofing a house. Had a good paying job. Refused to smoke inside the house. When he and my mom went out on dates, he always made sure to bring home food for all of us and toys for the younger kids. Would randomly take everyone out to dinner or to the theater. Despite all of that, I disliked him from the moment I met him. even before he showed interest in my mom. People told me I was being paranoid and not to worry about it. Fast forward a year, he and my mom are married. I just got a job and was waiting on my first paycheck to move out on my own. My manager gets a frantic call that I need to come home pronto. My stepdad had been secretly spending all of our bill money on pot. We were about to be evicted. The power had already been disconnected, the water service was about to be, and stepdad tried to kill my pregnant mom. Later on, during the restraining order court meeting, he threatened to cut the baby out of my mom's stomach and leave her and the fetus in an abandoned fridge in the field. He was buying an inordinate amount of pot and sharing it among 10 to 15 people daily. Not just enough to get high then, but enough to supply those guys and their wives or girlfriends. And yes, it was pot, not heroin. Story 11. I'm a chef, and within 1 minute of hiring someone, I know if they are going to work or will need to be replaced. First impressions mean a lot, so if you bring up killing your wife, which happened last week, or pain pills yesterday, within the first 5 minutes of your first shift, it's not going to work out because you're an idiot. Story 12. My partner moved in with a girl who was her best friend. I had gut feelings about her being not exactly stable, due to my own history of not being exactly a great teenager and also dating a few not-so-stable girls. I'm talking turning up at your house at 2 a.m. because I didn't reply to a text. My girlfriend loved this girl and had a great friendship apparently, so I let it go along. But then she went weird and started not showing up at the apartment for a couple of weeks. When she did turn up, she always did something impulsive that ended in failure. For example, bought a $50 washing machine that leaked everywhere. Oh, and told the other roommate that she'd hit the other roommate's cat with her car because she suddenly developed an allergy to them. Safe to say, my girlfriend finally realized that this other girl was unstable, manipulative, and frankly just didn't care about anyone but herself. She ended up breaking the lease, earning a mark on herself, and getting kicked out. Story 13. My older brother's best friend in high school was considered to be a cool guy, well-liked and fun to have around, except that I suspected him to be devious and something of a perv. He had this obsession for our mom that was obvious to me, but no one else picked up on it. One day after school, I caught him going through mom's drawers, checking out her personal clothes and underwear, and doing stuff I just won't mention here. After he got his motorcycle at age 17, he asked her if she'd like to take a ride. That's when I told my brother the truth about his so-called best friend, and asked him to put a stop to it or I'd tell Dad. Story 14. I feel like maybe I was that person a couple of times. Before years of therapy, I was a liar. This went on pretty much for my whole life. I've always been a really nice guy. I was just confused for a few decades. At the time, there had to be a few people who saw through me. I can remember one guy in particular who was in a group of friends I had at the time, who grew cold to me after a while. The worst part is that this behavior caused me to run away from everything in my life after a few years. At some point, my lying would start falling apart and I'd need to get new friends. I'm so glad that aspect of my life is over. To all other liars out there, you're not fooling anyone except for yourself. Get some help, please. Story 15. A few years ago, when I was still in college, I took a summer job at a movie theater. I met a lot of really cool people there, including my significant other. But there was this one guy who always gave me the creeps. We'll call him Drew. He was friends with almost everyone, including my SO, and had been for years. We'd attend the same parties and he'd do all these little things that would feel like red flags to me, but apparently not to anyone else. Fast forward about a year, I no longer work there. My SO and I have been together for maybe a year, and he has been promoted to manager. Drew has also been promoted to supervisor. It should be noted that there were a lot of teenagers employed at this theater. One day, 2 of the younger girls came into the office. If they were 18, they were only just to talk to my SO. They tell him they're sorry because they know my SO is friends with Drew, but they have to tell him something. The younger one tells him that a few weeks prior, she was sitting alone in the break room, eating her lunch. Drew walks in and says to her, "Do you touch yourself?" She doesn't answer. He says, "Because if not, you should." I think he said more, but my SO was so furious when he told me that story that he was having trouble telling it. My SO fills out the report for the poor girl and passes it on to the GM, who then informs him that Drew had 5 counts of sexual harassment on his file already, but corporate loved him, so they could never fire him. My SO never spoke to Drew again. Last I heard, he was fired and removed from his job at a brewery by security for sexual harassment. Many of our other friends are still very close to him. I don't understand it, but I'm just thrilled to have that creep out of my life. Story 16. When I was a boy, aged 7 to 8, at a coffee shop I would go to my parents frequently, there would often be a middle-aged Asian woman hanging out. She was a regular. The baristas knew her and my parents were friendly with her. Sometimes I would play board games with my parents and her. She gave me the freaking creeps, but I couldn't pinpoint why. My parents knew I didn't like her much, but not to the full extent. Anyway, the very first time I was with her without my parents, they were starting the car or something like that, she tried to get me to come back to her house. She wouldn't take no for an answer and got pushy. When my parents came back, I told them what happened and we never went there again. Story 17. Not me, but my sister. She has this uncanny ability to detect crazy people. My first boyfriend was secretly abused. She called it after knowing him for 2 days. My next boyfriend's mom eventually forced me to take a pregnancy test because I had been looking rather pregnant, and she wanted to know. She knew after the first visit meeting her. My toxic ex-best friend of 7 years, she knew after a year. All of the people my sister calls out for being crazy, I now believe and wholeheartedly avoid. Wow, I want to meet your sister and find out myself. Story 18. I had a manager years ago that everybody loved. When I was hired and ended up on his team, and any number of people came to me saying how lucky I was and that they were jealous. He takes care of his people, always gets good projects for them, makes sure they get a good cut of the yearly salary increase, etc., etc. The day I started was his last day before he went on a 2 to 3 week vacation, so I only met him briefly and walked away from that with plenty of anxiety. Something was just off with this guy. But again, everyone loved him. People that had known him for years. What did I know? Over the course of next year, people were just giving this guy a hand job at every turn. I didn't get it. We got along fine, but I made sure to keep my hand on my own dick. After a while, I'd start to voice my concerns a bit to some of my coworkers. I was treated as an outcast, and some of his bigger fanboys were outright hostile at times. So fast forward a few years, and to my knowledge, I was the only one of 100 people that ever voiced anything but absolute admiration for the guy. Then things started unraveling. Let's see. Turns out he was hooking up with the wives of his 2 employees. Rumor has it, also someone's daughter. But I'm not so sure about that. And I guess he left them with a lifelong gift that keeps on giving. He was for years regularly stealing from the company. I'd heard somewhere north of 1 million all up. I'm pretty sure that's probably an accurate number. He would regularly go on long-term 3+ weeks vacation. We find out it was because he had serial cases of drinking under the influence and was in jail or rehab 2 to 3 times a year. This was long before online records, so nobody ever knew. He frequently beat his wife and kids. Again, pre-online world, so nobody really had any way of knowing. One of his sons has some type of permanent vision problem because of a beating. He finally hit someone while drunk, so he had a trial. It was a family member of someone prominent in the community, so it got some press. That was how we all became aware that he was the real deal. He goes to trial and is convicted. They had a sentencing hearing and the victim and the family members said their piece. Then this guy's family, his father, a sister, and a nephew, go up to, we think, support him. Wrong. All 3 of them begged the judge to give him the max sentence. They spoke of him stealing from the family, massive drug and alcohol abuse, hinted at rape family members, and so on. The judge gave him 3 years, and I think he was out in 6 months. The insane thing is that some of his fanboys hoped that he'd be hired back to his job when he was released. People were jockeying to position themselves back on his team if he was rehired. I noped right out of there at that point. Story 19. When I first met my birth mother's uncle, I was instantly creeped out by him. He's in his 40s, in a band, has heaps of friends everywhere he goes, and gets on well with everyone. But I just had a horrible gut feeling and didn't trust him. He's a really touchy-feely guy, and he would try to kiss us on the lips and pass it off as just being family. Turns out he touched my birth mom and had sex with her when she was just a child. My mother let us, as children, hang out with her rape. His son, my birth mom's cousin, is a convicted pedophile. too, and just recently got out of prison. I'm so glad I was in long-term foster care, but I really wish I wasn't allowed contact with my birth family. They are truly the definition of screwed up. Story 20. My mother's cousin is a vet out in a rural area. This dude makes a bank and is a really nice guy. He was very close with his elderly mom and dad. Sadly, his first wife lost a ton of weight and then felt that she was out of his league and left him. A few years later, he shows up at my mom's house with a Sophia Loren type, 10 times out of his league. She was all sweet and sugar pie to everyone. I forgot what I did to piss her off, but it was an accident. She broke character just for a second and let Cruella de Vil show through. I was a kid and she grabbed my arm and looked at me like she would kill me. Everyone said I was crazy and mean, and that looks aren't everything, and that she loves him, like I was trying to sabotage his relationship. Screw me, right? Flash forward 2 years. She kicked his parents out of the house they were in for 50 years, sold their home against their will, stole all their money, forced him to choose between them and her. Sadly, he chose her. She drained him, tore apart his family, and ruined the last year of his father's life. He died scared and miserable. Told his mother, "Just give me the money. You won't live long enough to see it." It broke her heart that her son just stood there. But karma paid that witch a visit to the tune of acute leukemia, and she died. His mother is still alive and in her 90s and doing pretty well. He's back in the fold. Just sucks that his father didn't get to see the end, where everything went back to the way it was.
When did your "something is very wrong here" gut instinct turn out to be right? Story 1. In freshman year of college, your friend and I were driving across town and he stopped for gas. It wasn't a dangerous part of town or anything, just a quiet gas station with an old Buick out front. But this feeling came over me that we needed to get out of there. I tried to shake the feeling by making a joke. This feels like somewhere an axe murderer would hide out. My friend immediately gunned it out of there without filling up. He said he had the same feeling, and me bringing it up too scared the hell out of him. On the way home, there were about 20 police cars outside. It turns out some guy shot 2 people in a carjacking and robbery. The Buick was the car he stole. Lucky you guys made the run. Story 2. Tons of stories here, so not many will see this, but one day I was finishing up an essay in the library of my college when I saw someone through the slightly open blinds running. She could have been running to get to a class, meet someone, or 1,000 other things. For some reason I stood up, my girlfriend saw me stand up and ran to me immediately, and we ran out of the emergency exit of the library. We then ran to the opposite end of the college where everyone was acting normal. We climbed down the river, called my dad to pick us up down the road, and left the campus following the riverbed. It turns out the girl was running because someone was shooting people. The shooter was making his way into the library as we were running out. When we hit the emergency exit, the main doors locked from the outside and he was unable to enter the library, which led to him getting shot and killed by the police. Story 3. Not me, but I got told this story from my doctor. He was an aviation doctor in Australia. A pilot got recommended to visit a doctor because the company said he wasn't acting quite right. My doctor couldn't diagnose him with any disorders or illnesses, just sent him on his way. The company wasn't sold that he was all there and ended up paying him out. A few years later, my doctor got a call from the pilot's wife warning him to be careful, and apparently he was on his way back across the country for reasons his wife couldn't explain. My doctor, being the paranoid Pete that he is, called the AFP, Australian Federal Police, and got them to check his bags and his overall mental state at the border. Turns out he had a few guns in his luggage with a note containing names and addresses, one of which was my doctor. Story 4. Went out for beers with some friends, and the guy at the bar kept staring at my female friend. Didn't think anything of it initially, thought maybe he was just into her. Alarm bells start ringing for some reason. Minutes later, he went to my friend and then saw him try to slip something into her drink while she was talking to another friend of ours. Good thing I was watching, and told him to screw off with that roofie crap. He tried to punch me but missed, and the bouncers saw, and he got kicked out. The funniest part was that when we met up with a mate of mine from uni that night, he was beating ass for doing the same thing to his girlfriend. Watch your drink, lads. Story 5. At 1:30 a.m., leaving a club with a well-lit parking lot, we had just bought a bottled water and were walking to the car. We saw a couple, a guy holding a girl and a girl throwing up. Offered the guy to give the girl our water. He took a swig, didn't give her any, and put it back in the car they were in. We were a little taken aback and told him to give her the water. He made a vile, disgusting face as if we were cheering him on. We walked a few feet and knew something was wrong. Had the guys we were with check back, and he was pants down while she was unconscious, not puking. He was forcing himself from behind. From the front, it looked like all clothes were still on. Once discovered, they fell to the floor and she smacked her head on the pavement. My friends beat the crap out of him, and we called the police. Tried to comfort the girl, although she was very confused and disoriented. For some reason, he was insistent on explaining himself and calling her by the wrong name. Filed a police report, found her dumbfounded friends, and answered all of the detectives' questions when they called for a follow-up statement to give to the district attorney. Evil has a feeling. If you see something, say something. Looking dumb or feeling dumb is much less crappy than what could actually be happening. Story 6. I was walking home and a woman approached me to ask for directions. I told her how to get where she wanted to go, but she didn't walk that way, but instead walked beside me and kept pace with me. This made me incredibly uncomfortable, so I said, "Have a nice day," and doubled my speed, not running but outpacing her significantly. A moment later, I heard running footsteps. I must have instinctively gripped my purse strap because I held onto it as she ran by and tried to snatch it. We ended up tussling for a moment. I shouted very loudly, "Help! She's stealing my purse!" Neighbors came outside, causing her to walk away. She did not get my purse. Story 7. I've always been prone to gut feelings, but my mom takes the cake. She went to a boarding school and ended up leaving her senior year, but her 2 friends still went there. They all lived in similar areas for summer, and my mom wanted to go back and see everyone towards the end of summer break when she was 17. All 3 girls, including my mom, were going to take a train to a nearby station and meet up there and take a taxi to the school. My mom got to her home train station and got hysterical, which she never does, and told her mom she has a horrible feeling and doesn't want to go. Her mom told her to absolutely not go, and they went home. Later on that night, they got a call that the 2 girls were in a car accident with a drunk taxi driver on the way to school. My mom's best friend in the world was thrown from the car and decapitated. The other girl was so severely injured that she was more or less a vegetable and paralyzed from the neck down. She lived about another decade, unable to speak or move, and then passed away in a home. My mom has been through the ringer in life, but this has always made her to tell me to always follow my gut feeling. She said she never had a gut feeling when she was a teen, and this was the only time she ever did. She was looking forward to this trip for months, but that feeling was enough to make her back out right when she was boarding the train. My mom is so strong, and I'm not sure why this happened, but I'm thankful for whatever power allowed my mother to be okay. Story 8. I was walking home when suddenly I had this gut feeling. I will be mugged. I kept walking, and when I got to the corner, 2 guys jumped me. Started delivering some punches, but man, I'm no Rocky. My shirt was devastated, my nose was bleeding, I glanced and flew like 3 meters away. Oh yeah, most importantly, got mugged anyway. Story 9. I had a bad allergy season, which turned into a bad sinus infection, which turned into bronchitis. It wasn't getting any better, so I got into a general practitioner. He said it could be bronchitis or something worse. He couldn't call it. As much as I hate hospitals, my gut was screeching at me that something was wrong. Went to the emergency room just in case. I had 3 multiple pulmonary embolisms. 1 in 3 people with 1 undiagnosed PE doesn't make it to the ER. The doc said my lungs glowed in the CAT scan. On the upside, I have a strong heart, so I have that going for me. If you think something is wrong, if you have that creeping, crawling sense of doom, panic, unease, and fear that's settled on the back of your mind like a large spider, listen to it. Story 10. My friend asked me if I wanted to go out to the woods with him and explore abandoned places. He even specifically mentioned that he'll bring a firearm to keep us safe. My alarm bells were freaking ringing. I asked him a couple of questions. I don't know what, but concluded that it was sketchy as hell. My gut told me not to go, so I exited the conversation while he went asking others the same question. Fast forward a couple of years. I heard that he was in prison. I was stunned, but remembered the memory when he asked me if I wanted to go into the woods. Turns out he took a freshman, him being a senior at the time, and kept his promise of looking for abandoned places. He found a cabin in the woods, brought his friend inside, and as soon as his friend turned his back, bam, knocked dead. He shot him in the back of the head. I reminisce on this quite often. Think, what if I had agreed? Every time I think of this, I'm very grateful I'm alive. Dodged a bullet there, didn't ya? Story 11. I had a bad feeling about my aunt's boyfriend. I told my mom he seemed creepy, and I didn't want to stay the night there anymore. I got a bit of a lecture for calling him creepy, but she made sure I was never around him alone. And a good thing. He turned out to be a child molester who is currently in jail for his involvement in a kiddie ring. Story 12. In high school, I came home early one Friday evening to find that my house just felt off. It's so hard to describe, but the feeling I got walking into my living room just immediately had me on alert and didn't feel right. I walked into the kitchen to find a half-eaten burger from McDonald's, which I found strange. Called out to my parents but got no response. Called them on their cell but got no answer. 30 minutes later, my brother called to tell me that my dad had a heart attack and to get to the hospital. Thankfully, it turned out okay, but my gut quite literally knew something bad had happened the moment I stepped in the front door. Story 13. Went to see fireworks one time. As I was watching, I got a bad feeling being as close as I was, and even wondered how many people have died from fireworks. Not even 30 seconds later, one of the launch pipes for the fireworks tipped or something. All I remember were fireworks launching and exploding right in my direction, and one of the fireworks' tails whizzing right past my head, and me running away like mad. This reminds me of the Canberra Hospital implosion. In 1997, the Canberra Hospital was demolished, imploded, to make way for the National Museum. The government decided to make an event out of it and encouraged everyone to gather on the edge of the lake to watch. Over 100,000 people turned out, but the implosion was a failure and sent debris flying into a crowd 500 meters away. The young girl was struck and killed, and 9 other people were seriously injured. Story 14. I love my stepsister to pieces, but she's way too trusting with people she doesn't know well. About 10 years ago, she was living with a couple of roommates who became her best friends. She would tell me stories about them over the phone. We lived in different cities, and I would just think, Jesus Christ, these girls are messes. She could hear the weariness in my voice after telling me stories about their troubled lives and how they're really good people who've just been through a lot. I didn't buy it. I can't think of all the stories because it's been too long, but they were always sketchy as hell. Cut to my stepsister inheriting $20,000 from a deceased relative. She was young and super excited about it, and I knew she probably didn't keep the new money a secret. About 1 freaking week later, one of her roommates calls her panicking, saying that this guy who she'd been talking to online kidnapped her and was holding her for ransom, a $15,000 ransom. And she called my stepsister for the ransom, not her parents, her freaking roommate. She calls me freaking out because she didn't know what to do. I asked her if she had told her roommate about the money. Of course, she did. Move out, sis. Get the freak out. Those little girls who are really good people but have just been through a lot, yeah, they're liars. She reluctantly followed my advice and thankfully didn't try to make a deal with them. I told her to call the police. If I remember correctly, she didn't. She still worries me sometimes. Your stepsister sounds like an idiot. Story 15. Was walking through my hometown with my mother and ex-stepdad. I was roughly 14, I think. Suddenly, a man came up to us and greeted us. As soon as he shook my hand, I knew something was very wrong. Ex-stepdad knew him, so they engaged in small talk. The whole thing lasted less than a few minutes, but the entire time I felt this very strange and strong uneasiness. I whispered to my mom that the man that came up really feels shifty despite his normal appearance and behavior, and I told her we should leave ASAP. When he left, I asked her who that was, and she told me he was an acquaintance from way back and he was also a man with some serious mental issues, who was prone to sudden bursts of psychosis that would send him into a violent rage. Turns out he ran away from his caretaker that day and was carrying a knife in his pants. He was caught later on during the day and brought back to the local mental facility. Thankfully, the knife remained unused. Story 16. I laid eyes on my sister's then boyfriend and instantly hated him. I then noticed one of our dogs acted out of character around him, which made me hate him even more. We found out a year later that the boyfriend had been beating her regularly. Animals can sense intent. In this case, danger. Story 17. Driving with a friend of mine through a pretty remote forest road. A couple of guys in the middle of nowhere tried flagging us down. I almost stopped for them before an alarm went off in my head and I stepped on the gas. My friend started saying, "What the hell?" And at the same time there was a shot and a bullet hit the back of the car. We made it to a police station. Turns out there had been a bunch of people and vehicles going missing in the area that same week. Story 18. I started learning to play the alto saxophone when I was 11 at my Christian primary school. Absolutely hated my music teacher. There was something about him that made my body physically react in a get away from me manner. I would frequently beg to skip lessons, fake being sick, and tell my mom I hated it and didn't want to learn anymore, so eventually she took me to a private external tutor. Fast forward to 10th grade. He was sentenced to jail for 8 counts of sexual misconduct and 3 counts of statutory rape. My mom never questioned my gut after that. I'm so thankful I never was alone with that man. Story 19. I pulled into a gas station around 8 to 9 p.m. That wasn't in a ghost town or anything, but it was insanely dark due to the time of year. As I pull towards one of the pumps, I see this dude slowly pacing near the entrance of the convenience store, and we make eye contact. I quickly pulled the car to another pump towards one of the entrances to the gas station, trying to be safer but thinking I'm probably just being paranoid. Once I sit there for a minute and decide to put my car in park, he quickly rushes to my car. By the time I'm back in drive and peel out through the entrance into an oncoming lane, luckily no traffic, I saw him pulling out what looked like a large knife out of his jacket. I'm glad I didn't disregard my gut. Story 20. I stopped off at a dollar store to get last-minute stuff for my niece's birthday party. Foil or napkins or something. I went to the one I had never been to, in a seedy part of town. There weren't many other people there since it was a Sunday afternoon. A luxury car pulls up and this gorgeous man gets out and starts trying to catch my eye like he wanted to ask for directions. Dream come true, right? Except my gut started screaming run for no reason. I pretended I didn't see him and got in my car and left. The next morning I see on the news that 3 people were murdered in Charleston. They were all connected to one dude. One of their cars was stolen and the serial killer was on the loose heading west, through my area. Guess who the suspect was? Yep, the dude I'd seen. They arrested him after he'd kidnapped a girl in Augusta the same night I saw him, and she managed to escape. Still gives me goosebumps. What if I'd stopped and talked to him? Story 21. So I had a friend who I slowly had a worse relationship with as the years went on. I threw a party at my house and my invitations were very specific. I was in one of the phases where we had a recent argument and I didn't want to talk to him. He shows up at the party, I noticed him, but my dumb brain decided, oh, I must have invited him without thinking. We party for a few hours, then everybody starts leaving. Before we leave, however, that friend tells me to come to the basement. The basement isn't exactly one of those hangout basements. No, it's a stone underground room full of cracks and a sewage drain. Alarms go off in my head, because I knew how mad and vengeful he could get, and he was pretty upset after the argument. I tell him in a second, I need to change. There's still 1 or 2 guests in the house, luckily. I go to my room and text one of the guests about the situation. He tells me to walk the dog. Then when we go outside, me and the dog goes into the car and I stay the night at his house. Before I leave the next morning, I call the police and they check the house before I go in. To my horror, they come out with my friend detained. He was hiding in the basement with a knife waiting for me. Gives me chills to this day, thinking about him. Story 22. In my freshman year, my math class had a substitute teacher who we all agreed was really weird and creepy. He really only talked to the girls and made inappropriate comments. For context, this man was easily in his 60s. Well, when our teacher came back the next week, we complained to him about the sub and talked crap about him, being a creeper. The teacher was very upset. He said, I will not stand sub being disrespected like this. I have known this man for a decade and he's a kind, good man who would never do anything to a student or any person. 1 week later, sub was caught in the middle of the night breaking and entering a college girl's apartment and I believe trying to sexually assault her or doing some other perverse thing. The teacher came in the next day and apologized. He was only charged with residential burglary, a felony, but it was a woman's home at night. Story 23. Less dramatic than a lot of others, but nonetheless. Near my old apartment, there was a back road that you would take to get to Target. However, you had to go through one stoplight that was just on the other side of a hill's crest. From my side, the view is slightly blocked by a building towards the hill's high side. I pull up to the light and wait for it to turn green. It turns, and I wait for a second. The person behind me even honks, but something held me back. Before I can even think about starting to go, one of the open trailer trucks used to move construction equipment comes flying through the red lighting at probably 40 to 50 miles per hour. Not sure if I would have been hit or someone else, but I'm glad I didn't go. Story 24. I was away on a trip in mountains with my school. My roommate woke me up at like 3 a.m. and wanted to go skinny dip in the pool. I was fine until we got outside. It was pitch dark, and the woods were abnormally silent. I've been camping and hiking a lot in my life, so I knew to trust my gut feeling and the sounds of the forest. I practically had to drag my friends back inside, being sure to make noise the whole way. The next morning, we were kept inside for the morning because a huge black bear was outside strolling around. The prints showed that he had been there for hours, including the time that my friends and I were out. Story 25. Taking the question literally, when I realized that my appendix was about to burst and went to the hospital.
What's an uneasy gut feeling about someone that turned out to be spot on? Her neighbors had an older lady who lived with them, never left the house and was always in the kitchen working. They spun the story that she was their mother or their children's grandmother and she lived with them to help around the house. We took this at face value, but never seemed right. They would go away for a month every year and she would be left in the house, not allowed to leave for the month they were away. Sounds terrible now, but we actually affectionately nicknamed her the servant because she seemed to always be working around the house. Turns out they brought her over on a 3-month visa, didn't allow her to leave, and held her a servant in their house for 8 years. Our now ex-neighbors have both just been found guilty of holding a servant for 8 years and various other charges. Story 2. Me at 14. I think this guy my mom is dating might be a kitty fiddler. Yep, he wanted to buy me a PC for my birthday and insisted on buying me a webcam, even though I said I didn't want one. I woke up while he was sneaking in and out of my room at night. I started sleeping with a weapon under my pillow. It turns out this guy distributed videos and was looking to create his own. He mistreated his niece. She had a termination because of this schmuck. The kicker? We all lived at his sister's house with the niece. I didn't know anything until my mom and her friends, people who she met through the schmuck, spilled the beans. I basically got ripped from hanging out with the niece, thrown into a car, and was moved to a completely different town. I'm still looking for his niece to this day. Story 3. Dude, my PE teacher in freshman year gave us girls the creeps, too. He'd make us exercise and run laps while the guys got to sit there and watch. He'd play with our hair and accidentally come into our locker room. He started getting angry and would report it, and no one did anything about it. That is, until a middle school girl overheard me on the bus and went to her principal where they called in police to investigate, and he got caught trying to address a student in the locker room against her will. They finally fired him and replaced him with a better teacher. I'm glad to see these bad PE teachers getting caught. So let me get this straight. The principal from another school did something about that? Wow, that's just messed up. Story 4. My ex-stepfather had creeper vibes like that. Like seconds of meeting him and he wanted affection you'd give someone you were close to. I never gave him affection. He just knew there was something wrong with him. He started proving it near the end by hiding in the corner in a room in the dark with a cigarette, and we'd scream, "We know you're there. Get the heck out." Because her mom was mistreated and taught us all sorts of warnings about potential attempts from bad people. He'd leave after that. Eventually, my mom divorced him and got back with my dad. A few years ago, we found out via Facebook he was in jail for mistreating his daughter, the one he always talked proudly about and telling us he wanted to meet her someday. I hope she's doing okay because we never got to meet her and never had a way to contact her. Story 5. Friend of a friend. Dude gave me the creeps. He was nice enough and was well kept and there wasn't anything I could put my finger on about him. He didn't smile weird or anything like that. I just felt uncomfortable around him. He would always tell people he was a male feminist, which I thought cool enough. Was always using that as his shtick around the punk house he lived in with a bunch of other people. Anyway, eventually it turned out the dude was a serial criminal. Someone called him out and then other women kept coming forward. He would tell women it was cool to sleep in his room because he was a feminist and didn't drink. Turns out it wasn't safe to sleep in his room. At last check, he mistreated 9 women. He got the crap kicked out of him and skipped town. And he didn't go to jail at all? Huh? Story 6. One of my friends would always do weird stuff to people's drinks as a joke, like put pepper in someone's drink at a restaurant when they got up to go to the bathroom, or even mess with someone's water at a bonfire. Stuff like that. And I always thought it was super weird, his fixation on messing with people's drinks. He'd done crap like this since he was 7 when we met. Everyone knew not to leave your drink unattended around him because he would mess with it. Long story short, it turns out one of our buddies caught him trying to put something in a girl's drink and he got the crap roughened out of him. Super weird. We literally would joke as kids that he was going to be the creepy guy at the bar putting spikes in people's beer. Lesson learned, never ignore red flags in children. Story 7. My ex, who is referred to as he who shall not be named. It was spoiling me with attention and flowers, and it made me uneasy. I didn't listen to my gut because the gals at work were telling me how lucky I was to be spoiled. We moved in together, he isolated me from everyone, and then proceeded to start hurting the crap out of me. Tried ending me multiple times. Leaving wasn't an option, so I learned to deal with it. I had the life-saving opportunity fall into my lap that allowed me to kick him out. Get the landlord to rewrite the lease with just my name, and the job that landed in my lap allowed me to have my kids there when they were out of school. I never applied for that job, and they had no idea how they got my contact info. They saved my life. Literally. Story 8. My cool English teacher was, by all accounts, a fantastic stand-up guy that genuinely cared. I'll never forget my senior year. We had a kid that stopped coming midway through the year. Turns out his dad was a cruel drinker, and he changed his work hours so he would work during school so he could be there to protect his little sister from cruelty when she got home. The teacher convinced the kid to come back to school. Got his dad sent to rehab and checked on the family weekly until a student graduated. This was in the US about 17 years ago. There's some fantastic teachers out there too, but unfortunately, like many others, he got burned out and left a few years later. Story 9. When I was 17 to 19, I worked at this neighborhood pizza shop. There was this tall, skinny guy with braids that was always coming in really late at night. Even if he didn't end up buying anything, that by itself was weird, but it was his vibes more than anything. The way he'd either stand outside or come inside and sit down and just watch me the whole time. Nothing ever really happened outside of that, until one night when I ended up in the shop all by myself because other workers had either skipped out on their shifts early, were out on a delivery, or had stepped out the back for a smoke. All of a sudden, he was just there at the door, smirking at me like he had me where he wanted me. He threw open the door, stalked up to the counter, leaned so far over it that his face was in mine, and then said, "I'm going to do something to you." I backed up in shock. He continued, saying how he'd been watching me and that I could stop pretending not to be into him because he knew I was just waiting for him to come for me. Come on, girl, I know you're a freak. He was genuinely surprised and upset when I told him to get out or I'd call the cops. He basically said I'd better watch my back. I had to stop walking to and from work because of this guy. It was only a 15-minute walk, but with far too little lighting or far too many potential spots to get snatched or hurt. I feel like this is what happens when the frat boy never graduates. Story 10. My little sister and I always felt icky around our great uncle. We hated him and tried to be around our cousins or family whenever we could. This was before we were old enough to understand exactly what mistreatment was, but we did know our mom had had a sad childhood and she did whatever she could to protect us, telling us areas we weren't allowed to let people touch. This moment I'm about to tell you is still in my head, and the same goes for my sister and grandma. We were playing baseball on the Atari with our cousin, and we looked into the hallway and our great uncle was crawling on his hands and knees, beckoning at us. We just knew it was wrong and started screaming, and our cousin started screaming, and my grandmother ran down the hallway and started roughening him up. Turns out, he's a convicted criminal, and my mother and uncle are just two of many of his victims. Not long after this, he had finally been caught and put in prison. Our family explained to us that they were trying to keep us away from him, and glad we listened to them, and he finally got caught. From what I know, they had to put him in solitary confinement because tons of prisoners kept beating him up and trying to end him. Unfortunately, California State let him out due to good behavior, despite him having 39 known victims with 2 who had taken their lives. My mom and 15 of his victims fought to keep him in and lost. He was released 3 years ago and literally had the nerve to try to call my family to ask us to house him. Of course, we had strong words for him. And just to put a cherry on top of the suffering of his victims, my great-grandmother passed away and left him everything, so now he has a house and money to potentially continue his horrible behavior. My mother has done her best to cope with the trauma and we're always there to support her. The other victims sadly do not contact us, so we don't know how they're doing. All we can hope for is that karma gets him someday and his victims eventually get justice. It's sad that they don't allow other inmates to beat up kitty fiddlers. We all know they deserve it. Come on. Story 11. My dad built a new toy box for my daughter. It was so cute. We figured she would probably want to climb inside it, so we used a wide drill bit to make a few holes for air. A few nights later on my way to bed, I was struck with a horrible feeling. I went to check on her, and she wasn't in her bed. I went to the closet where the toy box was, and she was inside, covered in sweat, and the whole toy box had condensation on it. I quickly scooped her up and threw her in a lukewarm bath and made her drink some cold water. She was fine and went back to bed, but not before I scooted that heavy toy box to the living room, where it stayed for about another year until she was older and could be trusted with basic rules. They also added quite a few more air holes, just in case. Story 12. Told the story in greater detail elsewhere, but the professor in college, who taught him normal psychology, ironically, it turned out to be a kitty fiddler. Felt like he was doing his best imitation of a human being rather than, just being one. To me, he felt cold, distant, and reptilian. A few others felt similarly, but many didn't and were floored. During a period in the class where we were discussing inappropriate stuff, he took about 5 minutes to go on a rant about how anyone who'd ever found the Catholic schoolgirl get-up attractive was a sick, twisted, evil kitty After about the 3rd lap, I remember thinking, who are you trying to convince here, bud? Us or you? As it turns out, himself. Projection really is a heck of a thing. Bro thought he could build an unsuspicious alter ego. There goes that. Story 13. This could have turned out much worse, but here's my story. Years ago, I was in a drama class with this one guy. He had this nervous energy. Lego was bouncing, clicking, and tapping his pens, that kind of thing. I feel bad looking back on it. I don't like to be judgmental, but he always gave me a weird gut feeling. I mentioned to a friend in the class that Mr. Ansey gave off bring a weapon to school vibes. We chuckled, but nothing came of my little comment. Fast forward to the end of the quarter. Our final in the class was to either write, direct, or act in small skits. We were split up into several groups, mine choosing to adapt some Shakespeare piece that I've forgotten now. All of us met up the day before to do a practice run and critique one another. Mr. Ansey's group took the stage with him acting in the lead role. I later found out he'd written the script too. The skit was about a troubled dude in high school who had family problems, drinking problems, and was pestered by his peers. The main character, played very seriously by Mr. Ansey, brought a weapon to school and fired his oppressors, his teachers, the girl he had a crush on, and then himself. At the end of the skit, it turned out to all be a dream. But I was absolutely floored that I had somehow picked up on something. That guy was always nice to everyone, myself included, and I hope that he's doing well wherever he is. Story 14. PE teachers seem to be the worst. Years ago, my sister was being hit on by her PE teacher. This was in the 70s. He was 26. She was 16. My mother saw this apparently and threatened him with legal actions. This Smoke Schmuck didn't care, apparently. My mother did the next best worst thing possible. Found his parents and told them what was going on. Didn't have any more problems after that. I was adopted into the family at 15 by someone the age of a grandmother, so my siblings have at least 2 decades on me. One day I get a message on Facebook from someone who thinks my sister is my mother. The age difference makes it possible, and asks if I can tell her he wanted to talk to her, but I knew his name from this event. Ghosted that guy. I don't think he was ever charged with anything, but if he was doing it to my sister, then I imagine he was doing it to others. How schools hang on to these people is beyond me. Story 15. I had a new guy start working at a job, and he was very charming, personable, and friendly. Me and another coworker were the only people who didn't get a good vibe from him. Everyone else thought he was great. We come from toxic childhoods and pick up a lot of cues. Things he said, overly friendly, etc. He had everyone feeling bad for him because he wasn't able to see his daughter. Bad-mouthing his BM. He stopped coming into work. Turns out he got arrested for breaking a restraining order that he got from physically mistreating his BM. It was almost a textbook narcissistic and manipulative person. Charmed everyone, and everyone was shocked when they heard the truth. Me and my other coworker knew our awareness was right. If you don't have a good judge of character, always ask the people who've been through stuff. Story 16. I worked at an elementary school for a while with a seemingly really nice principal. He was really great with the kids, and the whole staff loved him. I got called in for a meeting about one of my students one day, and for some reason got super uncomfortable being in an enclosed room alone with him, which had never happened up until that point. I couldn't put my finger on it, so I blamed it on my past trauma and got through the meeting. A couple months later, he got fired and arrested for fiddling to women in semi-public. Thankfully, no kiddie stuff was involved, and to my knowledge, never hurt any children. Story 17. I attended a church in a southern state many years ago. I was as involved as I could with the congregation. I was not from the area, so the church family became my family. A man started becoming involved with the church. He said all the right things and did all the things you'd expect of someone genuinely interested in making himself a better person. But something just felt off. But I was the only one that felt that way. He was a con man. After a few weeks or months of ingratiating himself for the pastor or congregation, he promptly started targeting the elderly with his business ideas. Sort of the driveway resurfacing scams you see. Thankfully, it didn't last long, and he very suddenly disappeared off the face of the earth. The damage was minimal, but I felt vindicated a bit. Story 18. I needed a reasonably priced, specific location apartment in a large city within 3 weeks. I met 2 guys who shared a place, looking for a third roommate. That seemed okay. The one guy chain smoked, but the thing that set me off is his kind, quiet Japanese girlfriend who was studying abroad in our country. She was living with a guy in his bedroom, which was a huge living area. He kept talking about how everything was better in Japan when he went there and how the women were so much better. They were polar opposites. He insisted I pay rent in cash, never transfer, which was a red flag, but I needed the place. I had to hop on with him on his electric scooter. Yeah, I know. Well, he blasted music from it and picked up a carton of smokes while I grabbed the cash for first month rent. Anyway, as predicted, the guy was a horrible roommate and drank constantly. He would pressure his girlfriend after she would cook some amazing Japanese meal to come get hammered with him, although she never drank. He would come in on weekdays at 2 a.m. and eat her leftovers and our lunches, throwing food in containers everywhere after every night. She would clean the kitchen spotless. I found out why he only wanted rent and cash. I found a notice from another province for child support, and he was claiming the entire apartment as is he was paying for. He was a slug dad, and he would blast Metallica on these huge speakers all hours of the night. When I asked him to keep it down as I had work the next day, he screamed, "The rules are there are no rules. The sooner you get that, the better it will be for you." So I gave my notice. The other roommate was a chill, nice dude, as was that girlfriend, and the day before I left, I asked her why she was with him. She said, "When I first came here, I lived in a house with 12 other Japanese students. There were cockroaches everywhere, in my bed and clothes. I met him and it's a better situation. I'm also sick of him. I'll go back to Japan. That is it." He then gave her a ring at Christmas with the tiniest microscopic diamond I've ever seen. It was sad. Story 19. One night I was closing a work, alone, and this guy just gave me chills. Odd behavior, lingering, and wouldn't leave me alone. I finally left and I asked my dad to come over and wait in the parking lot until I came out just to be safe. The next shift, his mugshot was posted in our break room. Multiple instances of arrests, all taking place in our shopping center. Dude was not right. Turns out he was even banned from the place and had multiple restraining orders against him. Always trust your gut, folks. Story 20. A couple months ago, I met this guy and we got to chatting. Right around the same time we met, I started having the weirdest changes. For some reason, I lost my appetite completely, lost interest in a lot of my normal hobbies, and just felt generally restless. I had literally no idea what was causing it since everything in my life, work, family, personal, was going great. But again, it started at the same exact time I started talking to this guy. He really seemed like a good, genuine guy, and I liked him a lot. A couple weeks later, I realized he wasn't really who I thought he was, and things ended as quickly as they started. After we went our separate ways, everything went back to normal, and I could eat, and I felt normal again. I've never had anything like that happen before. So strange, but it was like my body knew something was off before I did. Story 21. When I was in grade 9, I sat beside this one kid in French class. I was quiet, awkward, and liked to be noticed as little as possible. The kid was brash, loud, easily agitated, always in trouble, was popular, but also always gave me weird and off vibes. He was the type of kid that you looked in the eye and could just tell there was something off with him. I vividly remember him always barging into class late, loudly singing children's songs and nursery rhymes while striding to the back, before the teacher either threw him out or waited for him to settle down. Everyone always laughed and thought he was a jokester. I nervously tried to have him notice me as little as possible, while also trying to stay in his good side in case he ever snapped and did something. Fast forward 10 years, and this guy's made national news for allegedly hurting his girlfriend's 9-month-old child. He's actually still on trial, claiming that he didn't do anything and he found the child unresponsive. There's a mound of evidence against him. There's absolutely no way I believe him. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 22. I was doing community theater and we were a close cast. My closest castmate had met a guy whom she fell madly in love. Everyone liked him a lot for a million reasons, but mainly because he treated my friend so well. The one holdout was one of my other castmates' husbands. He couldn't put it into words, just had a bad feeling. We all said, "Oh, you're being a pooper." Cut to 6 months later, and my friend was visiting relatives in Canada, and she got this call from the police. He had mistreated 6 middle school students and 1 adult that we know of, and did it a couple of times in their bed. He gave her one of my friends' t-shirts to wear, and she somehow was able to get out of there alive. When the police came to arrest him, he ended himself. The coward. My friend had to fly all the way back from Canada and come home to a massive pile of crap to deal with. She was never the same after that. We all wondered what clues we missed. Someone said, "Joe didn't miss the signs, remember?" Joe had known something was off from the start. The whole thing was so tragic. Story 23. A friend once invited one of his coworkers to one of our meetups. We just wanted to play Magic and chill together. I had a really hard gut drop when he arrived and couldn't quite put my finger on why. He proceeded to get absolutely wasted, tried to establish himself as the coolest in the room. His girlfriend, who he brought along, turned out to be 14, while he was in his mid-20s. He tried to force himself on my sister and started to completely escalate when he was stopped by my friends. I had to force him out and pin him down while I called the police. He proceeded to punch an officer during his arrest, and we later had to appear in court to give our statements. At the court date, he had a new girl with him who also looked way too young. Best thing is, my idiot friend invited him again. You guys can figure out why we aren't close anymore. Story 24. My infant nephew. I know this sounds harsh, but read to the end. When I met him, 3 weeks old, I could barely look at him. My stomach turned over. My wife held him, and my brother and his girlfriend offered to let me hold him, but I couldn't. The idea made me physically ill. I've always been good with kids, so him being a baby wasn't the issue. 2 weeks later, he passed away in an accident in the home. He was accidentally smothered while he slept when someone rolled over on him while co-sleeping. Nephew was totally innocent, of course. He was barely 5 weeks old. I knew he was about to pass away. I could feel it to the depth of my core but couldn't vocalize it. Who in their right mind would have believed me? Well, what I can say is whoever rolled over was very responsible. Story 25. Sat next to a guy in my high school graduation who I'd never seen before. Gave me the absolute creeps. Must have gone the alternative school route, made up credits to walk with class or some such, but he was very leery with our classmates. Inappropriate jokes, laughing at weird times. Dude was awkward as heck on top of being very unnerving to be around. He was in the news at the end of the summer that year. It turns out he'd gotten a girlfriend pregnant, had a daughter, got a trailer and a job as you do in rural America. One day, because she wouldn't stop crying, he hurt his infant daughter. I believe he got 30 years in prison or thereabouts. Story 26. This isn't about a specific person, but in college I was on my way to some random party with my girlfriends and I had the worst feeling. I felt sick to my stomach, like we should not go to this party for some reason. I stayed quiet for as long as I could, but I kept seeing weird signs along the way there. I even saw a billboard that said something like, "It's never too late to turn around." I told my friends about my feeling and said, "Look, we can go. We're almost here, but I have the worst feeling about this party and I don't know why. I really feel like we should turn around and just go home." My friends actually listened to me and we went home. Later that night, we found out that someone brought a weapon to the party and was threatening to fire at people. He had an altercation with someone trying to kick him out, and he fired 2 people because of it. Needless to say, my friends were very glad but also freaked out by my gut feeling. Lol. Story 27. A few years ago, I went on a date with a man. He was pleasant and good-looking with a really good job. Wrote for a big city newspaper. He had everything I was looking for, but something didn't feel right. And I almost got an asexual vibe. Or maybe that he just wasn't that into me. So I was very surprised he wanted a second date. Knowing I was broke, he offered to take me to an expensive date. Normally, I wouldn't take someone up on that, feeling worried I'd owe them, but my grandmother told me he looked like a nice man and I needed to let someone do something nice for me. The day was going well, so I drank some wine. Afterwards, he told me he wanted to show me some kittens he rescued, knowing I was big into animals and had rescued myself. He made me a drink when I went there, and I should have noticed, but in hindsight, he did not drink anything, and it wasn't in the room he made it. I remember feeling suddenly very sick and rushing to his bathroom. I had flashes of getting in his bathtub with the door shut, feeling nauseated. That, to me, is so shockingly rude. I would never ever just get into a stranger's bathtub. After that, I remember only bits and pieces. Him leading me to a room and him on top of me, and then him dropping me off in my apartment. I had a kit done, but no real evidence other than red marks, possible ligature marks on my neck that shocked the nurses. When I told my grandmother, she told me, "Well, I didn't tell you to go back to his place." Still feels so naive and stupid. He now works for a very prominent national newspaper, and when I saw an article he wrote in support of the Me Too movement, I felt such rage. I now trust my gut instinct and never second think about it. Story 28. My music teacher in high school. The very first class I had with him, I noticed his relationship with a senior female student was a little too intimate. I was 13 at the time, but I could tell something wasn't quite right. Throughout the years, I continued to notice similar behavior, including one time when a female friend of mine who was moving to another school got a handwritten letter from him with actual tear stains on it that said something along the lines of, "You've been such a big part of my life. I don't know what I'll do without you." In my last year, he was arrested at his home in front of his wife and 2 kids for mistreating his students. He got away with it for so long because everyone, including the principal, was obsessed with him. He was convicted and is serving 12 months in prison, which seems like a joke of a punishment. The creepiest part is that he had a junior and senior vocal ensemble that would convene after school hours, which I later realized was essentially his method with his students from a young age. That is just disgusting. Story 29. When I was a senior in high school, the new movie theater opened and was hiring. It was one of those service theaters with a full restaurant. I sat down for an interview for a waiter position, and the manager was giving me uneasy vibes. I couldn't pin it at the time, but the look he gave me in the interview felt off. Not only was he a schmuck during the interview, he seemed to never make eye contact, and when he finally did, it was like he wasn't even looking at me. A few days later, he called to say I got the job, but I declined. 2 weeks later, it came out he was mistreating one of the bartenders, and guess which day I was there? One of the days he decided to mistreat her. Sometimes you can tell. Story 30. My parents divorced when I was a baby, and I never actually knew my father. He came once to visit when I was about 8 years old, and that was pretty much the first time I met him. He was supposed to stay for 4 days or so. When I first met my father, for some reason, I got extremely scared. Didn't know why. Told my mom, and she told me not to worry too much and just get to know him. My mom was with me for the first few days, and that feeling never passed. He always tried to hug me and touch me in ways a normal dad would, but I never met the guy. On his final day, my mom let him spend time with me alone, and we went to his hotel room. I went to the bathroom and left the door open, and I walked in to wash my hands, assuming that I could, because, the door was open. He said it was okay for me to be there and told me to be comfortable around him. Since then, my mind had essentially blocked out these memories, and I didn't think or remember it at all until one day about 10 years later, this year, I was near the hotel and it just triggered all those memories. I think I have PTSD now and haven't told anyone aside from Reddit. Anyways, yeah, gut feeling told me to be afraid of my father. I guess my gut was right. Story 31. My close family friends, now ex-husband, he was a huge teddy bear of a guy and was super nice and friendly. Seemed like a good guy at first, but after a while I noticed that he was just off. Seemed too friendly towards me and it made me very uncomfortable. Very touchy-feely and would stare at me a lot. Turns out, he had been cheating for almost the entire marriage. Mostly online, not in-person stuff. He was an intimate freak who would demand intimacy from his wife on a constant basis. They had brought her grandpa from another state to care for him, and he yelled at her for not giving him intimacy the night her grandpa passed away, in her house. He ended up getting an 18-year-old mail-order bride from Ukraine and divorced his wife. Story 32. This guy knew in the 8th grade. So we were 13 years old. He was always screaming and ditching school, already doing grown-up stuff with this girl he was dating. He was just acting way beyond his age. always pretending he was the streetwise dude who was down for whatever. I knew at 13 he wasn't going to amount to anything in his life. Fast forward to about 18 to 19 years old. He's a high school dropout, has one baby mama, and another woman pregnant also. He's an active gang member. Fast forward a few more years later, so now he's like 24 to 25 years old. He gets arrested and charged or convicted for illegal possession of firearms, participation in an active gang, and more. I mean, sometimes you can tell how a person's life will end up even at a young age. I always knew he was going to be in prison someday. Like I said, don't ignore red flags in kids. Story 33. I had a social studies teacher in 8th grade literally named Mr. Rank. He seemed to have girls come up to his desk more often than not and stood eerily close when advising them or grading their papers. He was a heavy-set guy, so it couldn't have been my imagination or just his weight, but I swear he'd breathe heavier near them. Always was nicer to the girls, too. A while back, I heard he got in some hot water regarding personal boundaries with a couple female students, but I can't tell if it's just a rumor or not. I wouldn't doubt it, given how he acted and how crap that school was. If anyone from Pennsylvania went to PV, let me know if I'm remembering right. Story 34. During my fiance's second year of college, we went to a nightclub with two of her friends. One of her friends was dancing with a sketchy-looking guy. The friend came over to dance with us for a bit while the guy was getting her a drink. He came back with only one drink and he wouldn't drink out of it. I told my fiancé that we needed to leave and her friend was coming with us. The 3 sips of that drink she had was the only alcohol she had all night, and after the 5-minute walk to the bus stop, she could barely stand. By the time the bus got to our stop, I had to carry the friend because she couldn't walk. I put her in her bed, and the next morning she said she didn't remember leaving the club. The guy had put a spike in her drink. Never drink something you've lost sight of that someone else has handled. Story 35. That my husband was trying to cheat on me. Anytime I had a pain in my gut, I would snoop on his phone. I know that is a crap thing to do, but I only did it when I had this feeling and felt he was lying when I would ask. And sure enough, every single time, I would find emails and messages and photos even between him and another. Made me feel good that pretty much all ignored his advances, but then came the shame and guilt and humility once the reality of the situation emerged. I gave him way too many chances because we have kids together. It just got worse and worse. Finally split after he got intoxicated and harmed me repeatedly while I was driving with our youngest, 18-month-old, in the back seat, while at a Christmas or New Year celebration with the majority of my family there. When we were barely dating for 4 months, we did stuff together, and he decided that as soon as we started coming up, it was the perfect time to admit he kissed 2 other girls while we were officially dating. He caused me to have a bad trip and us arguing the entirety of it all. I told him I was having a vision, for lack of a better term right now, of us being exactly as my mom and dad, but he begged and pleaded and promised and worked pretty hard to fix it for a bit. 10 years and 2 kids later, I was right about everything. Trust your gut the first time, please. December 30th is my New Year celebration, almost 3 years free from that schmuck. Story 36. In 2011, living in Israel, I made a friend. A young American with an eerie childhood dream of joining an IDF unit. Was usually fun to hang out with, but every discussion or disagreement we had, he balled his fists. His face got red and he had veins popping on his forehead. When my kin playfully bit him, he just barely stopped himself hitting him so hard that the blow could have ended him. I saw all the red flags, but suffering from severe abandonment and rejection issues at the time, didn't allow myself to actually recognize them. One day, we wanted to go shopping, but I had to get money from the bank first, through my account manager. That woman was wasting time asking personal questions and stalling the withdrawal for obscure reasons, and my friend kept butting in to see how much longer we were going to take. Now badgered by 2 people, the third time he butted in, I asked him a bit sharply to back off and he gave my chair a hard shove. Stormed out, and when I found him on the same bus, he arrogantly waved me off with a not interested and started crap-talking me to his other friend in front of me. I didn't hear him, but he made gestures that said it all. The next day in school, he walked me outside to talk about it, and I thought, great, we're adults now. But instead of a mature, productive discussion, he looked me straight in the eye and said that if I were to cause problems over that shove, regarding his good impression with the army he was about to join, he knows where I live, and also he grinned when he said this. He knows how to make me end myself using only words. Oh wow, so that's what knowing a narcissistic sociopath feels like. Story 37. Didn't like my friend's boyfriend. He just gave me the absolute creeps. So sweet to her in public, but it was like she was afraid to be herself or say what she was thinking around him. He would also do small controlling things you probably wouldn't recognize unless you've experienced intimate partner violence. Paid for everything and got very defensive, with a smile if she offered to pay. Ordered her food, sat where he wanted her to sit, would call her away for a conversation and she'd follow immediately. They broke up and I never heard anything other than he was controlling. So yeah, He's now awaiting trial for breaking into her house after the breakup and trying to harm her in her sleep. Story 38. Met a new kid at school in 8th grade. He was friendly enough for a while, but something in the way he talked seemed off from the beginning. Yeah. Turns out he was a massive control freak, and I'm not a psychologist, but I'm pretty sure an actual sociopath. He lied constantly about both himself and others, pestered people when they wouldn't give him attention, had this weird fixation of being the leader of our group friends and seemed to want people to obey him, kissed one of my friends without her consent and threatened to end himself when things didn't go his way. He seemed like the archetype of the young to-be criminal, even down to the weird drawings. He would constantly draw monsters or distorted faces representing the people in her class, always in a position of worship to him. In 2018, when I hadn't talked to him for over a year, I found out he had been expelled from our school. He apparently had a fight with a girl and decided to draw himself firing at her and leave it on her desk. That kid was a walking ball of issues. No idea where he is now. I hope he got the help he needed. Story 39. I hired a guy once for an entry-level position at a manufacturing facility that I ran. He seemed like a good candidate, interviewed well and had all the right answers. I offered him a position and he accepted. I sent his paperwork down to Human Resources, and for some reason or another, they never did a background check. Fast forward a week or so later, I happened to bump into him in the warehouse, and I wanted to check on him and see how his training was going. He was very nonchalant and didn't have a lot to say. Next day, I see him in the warehouse again, and I ask him what he's doing. He's trying to find something for a customer that was there to pick up, and I was amazed at how much he had learned in only 3 days. He was trying to find a needle in a haystack, and yet he was right there getting the item. The average new hire would have taken months to learn a system and understand how to read the location, find the location, and read the tags to understand that they have the right product. I was amazed at how quickly he had caught on and definitely identified him as somebody that could fill a much-needed position in our facility. I started thinking about it later in the day, and for some reason I went online and Googled his name. Needless to say, my gut feeling was right. There was something not right about him. He had recently been arrested as part of the sophisticated ring of thieves who had stolen tens of thousands of dollars of merchandise from several Home Depots and Walmarts in the area. He was out on bail, and the investigation led them to a house that he was living in that had 6 figures and stolen high-end items within 25 miles from our location. Needless to say, I let him go that day. Story 40. I had a friend in 7th grade. She moved to the school that year, and I befriended her. She was nice enough, but was so desperate to be in a relationship. Like it was bad. She literally cornered a guy and tried to kiss him once. She handled rejection horribly and was very immature about it. It was super embarrassing, and I just knew she would be one of those girls who ended up pregnant in high school. Thankfully, she moved out of my school district the next school year, so I didn't have to deal with an awkward "I don't want to be your friend" convo. We just lost touch. She went on to get pregnant at about 16 with a complete slum, who I believe was over 18, and straight up ditched her. I was glad we stopped being friends because I would have had to deal with all the drama surrounding it. She has since married and has 2 more kids, and they seem like a happy family, so it seemed to have worked out for her at least. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.